Welcome everyone. Very good afternoon to all our friends and guests joining from UK and Europe. Good morning to our guests joining from the US, and a very good evening to our guests from India and Southeast Asia. Welcome to our seminar, which is part of a seminar series on the digital future for business and society, perspectives on AI challenges and opportunities. This seminar series is hosted jointly by Professor Yogesh Dwivedi. Professor Yogesh Dwivedi is Professor of Digital Marketing and Innovation, Founding Director of the Emerging Markets Research Center, EMaRC for short, and Co-Director of Research at the School of Management, Swansea University in Wales, UK. Our co-host for today is Professor Ramakrishnan Raman. Dr. Raman is our director at Symbiosis Institute of Business Management, Pune in India. He is also Dean Faculty of Management, and SIBM, as we are known in short, we are one of the top 10 B schools in the country. Our seminar series is supported by the Center for Technology, Innovation, Management and Enterprise, the University of Kent, UK, Digital Marketing and Analytics Special Industry Group at the Academy of Marketing, Grenoble IAE-Graduate School of Management, which is a Grenoble INP school of the University of Grenoble, Alpes. Swansea iLab, Innovation Lab at the Swansea University, the E-Business and the E-Government Special Industry Group, British Academy of Management, and the UK Academy for Information Systems, known as UKAIS in short. To tell you a little bit about the seminar series itself, this is inspired by various perspectives on artificial intelligence and its transformative potential, as presented in a recent perspective article by Dwivedi et al. 2019. AI undoubtedly offers a transformative potential for the augmentation and even potential replacement of human tasks and activities within a wide range of industrial, intellectual, and social applications. The pace of change in this new AI technological age is staggering, with new breakthroughs in algorithmic machine learning and autonomous decision making, creating new opportunities for continued innovation. The impact could be significant, with industries and sectors ranging from agriculture, finance, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, supply chain, logistics, and utilities, all potentially disrupted by the onset of AI technologies. This seminar series presents various perspectives from a number of leading expert speakers to highlight both the opportunities and challenges posed by the rapid emergence of AI. Allow me now to introduce our speaker for today. So, Mr. Jack Spencer is an award-winning researcher and designer focused on people-centered innovation projects. He has a PhD in design for behavior change, which developed a framework for understanding and influencing behavior across different markets. Jack has worked on a diverse array of people-centered innovation and strategy projects for global brands, including Google, Facebook, IKEA, and Unilever, amongst others. Jack is a partner at Urban Scale Interventions, a creative studio that responds to changes in the places we live, work, and play. Through this, he uses people-centered design methodologies to develop technological, social, cultural, and physical solutions to challenges in our cities. Jack is an active fellow of the Royal Society of Art. His work has been disseminated at international industry and academic conferences and published in trade magazines and academic journals. He is currently authoring a book for Routledge on the influence of design on the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Jack, the floor is all yours. If we can request you to start.
Thank you very much, and I'll share screen, and thank you for that great introduction. And again, thanks very much to everyone and for organising the series and inviting me to share my thoughts, really. What I was going to do is just talk a little bit about us, about urban scale interventions, and about our kind of people-centered perspective on artificial intelligence. And I'll talk about some of the challenges and the opportunities that we see in our line of work. And then I'll share just briefly a project where we've used some of that thinking here in Belfast, where I'm currently situated. So that's what we'll do, and then I'll hand over to questions, and it'd be great to get some comments and thoughts on that going forward. Let's see if we can, here we go. So urban scale interventions, that's where the organisation I'm at the moment. We're a multidisciplinary team of designers, researchers, strategists, technologists, and makers. And really, as the introduction said, I suppose we look to solve city challenges and challenges in the places that we live, work, and play by creating public value through creativity and design-led thinking. We have a Venn diagram. Every good organisation has a Venn diagram. This one's ours. But really, we focus on that intersection between people, place, and purpose. So people being really about how do we understand the needs of people on the ground, everyday people, citizens, stakeholders, whoever that might be. How do we get them bought into the design process, through that co-design process? How do we understand what those real needs are on the ground? The place bit comes from understanding that everything that we do, whether it's working on a building, on a neighbourhood, on a region, or at a country scale, we know that there's a story there, a history, a heritage, there's assets, and there's a legacy, and we want to tap into that narrative and some of those stories as we come up with design interventions and design solutions. And then obviously purpose being that really important one. What are we actually trying to achieve when we do a project? Is it about improving well-being? Is it about activity, economy, tourism, connection, play, etc.? Just a little bit here. These are some of the strands of the projects that we work on. We do quite a lot of work on cultural projects, but really how we can use culture and cultural projects to explore wider themes around heritage, tourism, education, and resilience. And obviously everything that we do at a cultural level, whether that's at a city scale or networked at a European or global scale, it's always about how do we strategically align to global goals, the UN SDGs or the World Health Organization goals, or whatever that might be. We do a lot of work around public space and well-being, and one of the projects that I'll touch on later is about how we've used AI in some of the work that we've done there within public space and well-being, and how that's come from a collaboration and a partnership with the Department for Health here in Northern Ireland. We do a lot of work with government departments around how do we take policies and strategies and make them relevant to citizens and stakeholders and people, but also how do we measure impact? And again, we'll talk a little bit about how we go about that, and where I think some of the links between, I suppose, design thinking and kind of big data and AI can really feed into kind of policy and strategy level. And then obviously the technology for social good piece, where a lot of the work that we've done, whilst it might start off at quite a human level and really exploring kind of people-centered, everyday needs, starts to scale up into a kind of technology platform that might then be scalable at a national or global level. And that's really where I think there could be some great discussion from the AI perspective. And we deliver a broad range of services, right from initial scoping studies right through to design of actual interventions and delivery of interventions. And like I say, we'll talk a little bit about that. But I thought where I'd start is I suppose just a little bit of definition on kind of people-centered design and design thinking. I don't want to teach grandma to suck eggs, but without knowing the exact makeup of the room, I come in it and very much from I'm not a technology expert. My background is in behavior change and understanding people-centered design, and I think that's where the interesting relationship is between design thinking and AI and some of the opportunities there, and we can talk a little bit about that. In terms of from a people-centered and design thinking perspective, we work quite a lot to the UK's government definition of inclusive design, which is really about designing environments and products that suit the needs of the widest number of consumers. And so a lot of what we do is looking at how do we explore the needs and how do we go out broadly with our research to a large group and a large number of different user groups and different people to understand that wide, diverse perspective of needs. But ultimately, what we're talking about really is design centered around people. That's that's what people-centered design is, right? It's about focusing on what are people's needs. And a large part of what we try and do there is design to reduce exclusion, whether that's social exclusion, economic, cultural, geographic, gender, whatever it might be, whatever that level of exclusion might be. We try and focus on design to reduce exclusion, and ultimately, put simply, we design to improve life. That's what we try and do, and that's where we use design thinking. For us, I think design thinking comes very much from this definition of kind of wicked problems, where we start to look at when we start to explore some of those challenges that we're facing, particularly in today's in today's world, whether those whether we're talking about public health, or we're talking about the economy, or we're talking about the environment, or whatever we might be talking about. We're looking at it very much from this perspective of it being a problem that is quite difficult to describe, has numerous causes, multiple unclear boundaries, interconnected, unique, and ultimately is a wicked problem, as Rattel and Weber defined many years ago. But ultimately, the societal problems that we're trying to deal with is don't have these right and wrong answers, and they're kind of continually ongoing. And I think that's where hopefully we can try and get to, particularly when we start to look at AI and what we can use AI for, but also bringing it back from a people-centered perspective in terms of how do we sort of use the power of one and kind of do that qualitative research piece. Just quickly for us, the way that we go about design is through the double diamond process, which is a process first coined, I think, by the UK government about 15 years ago, or the UK Design Council, sorry. But really, it's kind of a 4-stage framework for innovation, and we find it quite a useful tool, where really in this first diamond, what we're looking at is that people piece, if you like. So really actually going out, understanding people's needs, creatively exploring what some of the challenges and opportunities might be, and the priorities and the aspirations, then synthesizing those insights around some kind of key opportunity areas, developing ideas off of the back of that, and that's where we might bring in then technology and AI in terms of what some of those solutions might be, and then looking at how do we deliver those. So like I say, really it's about going out and creatively engaging stakeholders and citizens, and this is examples from a shop that we popped up in the high street in Belfast to ask people about their priorities for cultural development in Belfast. Then actually synthesizing and mapping what some of those opportunity areas are, whether that be geographic or thematically. Then actually co-creating some of those solutions with stakeholders and citizens on the ground. And obviously prototyping, testing, and iterating, and that's really where we bring in elements of technology to the development stage of it, and then obviously delivering what those interventions might be on the ground, whether that is an actual physical intervention, whether it's a technological intervention, whether it's a strategy or a policy. So that's really, I suppose, a little bit about us and our kind of way of thinking, if you like, and how we approach problems from a design perspective. I thought what might be quite useful, and I think when I was talking to Professor Yogesh about some of those challenges and opportunities from the design perspective, we thought it would be useful to outline what we see as some of the challenges for artificial intelligence and AI and technology development, particularly under that theme of kind of people-centered people-centered design, if you like. One of the big challenges that we see, and we know that the more we develop technological solutions to some of our challenges, and the more that it gets embedded in people's everyday lives, the less of this we might see. But at the moment, there's still quite a negative connotation, particularly with Joe Public, you know, everyday citizens, if you like, around what actually is artificial intelligence, what's machine learning, what are these things, and there's been obviously a lot of negative press around some of that, you know, in terms of everything from data breaches to mass unemployment, removal of freedoms, you know, even kind of global warfare happening, you know, with kind of machines, as it were, and there's still perceptions of this kind of dystopian view of what AI is, and so there's a little bit of a job there, if you like, to almost reframe with people, you know, some of the benefits and some of the opportunities that AI has and can have when we're looking at improving people's lives and improving the places that we live and work in. There's also this interesting I suppose interesting quote. I quite like this quote from Cathy O'Neill in the book Weapons of Math Destruction, where algorithms are just opinions embedded in code. And this was quite an interesting project that we did actually while I was at the Royal College of Art a couple of years ago. And I suppose it comes back to that idea of the issue or the challenge of playing the creator, if you like. And one of the things that we were looking at was voice assistants and chatbots and digital assistants. And one of the pieces of work and research that we did started to outline that actually the vast majority of digital assistants almost get programmed as effectively white, young, blonde female. And that can obviously can be a challenge, particularly there's the issue of being a creator of an algorithm or being a creator of a piece of technology that then goes forward. There's the problem with artificial intelligence, potentially, where we start to use society as a cue for the development of that piece of technology or of that piece of intelligence. And again, this was some research here done that looked at the gender distribution of artificial intelligence applications, and actually when we see them as assistants, they're very much majority female, whereas actually where we see AI played in movie roles, typically as a more dominant and authoritative figure, 74% of those in movie roles are male. So you start to see these kind of gender discrepancies or social cues, and you can start to see how artificial intelligence might start to learn negative impacts and things from our society, if you like. This was quite a famous example or a popular example where there was a chatbot that was put forward on Twitter, and within 24 hours it had been taught effectively to be racist. So there's all these, I suppose, negative connotations for how artificial intelligence might be created or create itself, but based on some of the negative stereotypes and negative actions obviously happening within our society as a whole. Obviously, the motivation here is particularly with the chatbots, what we started to look at is the belief that, yes, people tend to perceive female voices as helping solve our problems by ourselves, while male voices are more authoritative and act as kind of authority figures. But obviously the implication of that is that we start to build on perceived stereotypes and negative stereotypes going forward, and this can reinforce negative behaviour, and it can be seen to reinforce negative behaviour. Even currently, the top 4 voice assistants on the market today don't respond negatively to being called a slut, for example. So it starts to build on that negative stereotypes. And then there's also that flip side of that, where if we can program algorithms and we can program artificial intelligence to take out some of those biases, and we can start to do that. But us as humans have those biases almost programmed in. So then you start to move that artificial intelligence away from our social and cultural norms, and then that starts to become a whole different challenge and challenge area, because we're not used to interacting with it or using it in the way that it could be used without any of those preconceived or prejudged biases. Another challenge area that I thought might just be interesting to touch on is this idea of productivity and efficiency. And again, it's an area that is always under development and always being challenged. But a lot of what we've seen is AI and new technologies coming in, really with the kind of the remit or the goal of being productive and efficient, and really obviously improving our productivity and improving our efficiency. But when I talk about I'll come later to talk a little bit about some of the opportunities. We see that productivity and efficiency isn't everything, and particularly when we start to talk about the human condition and actually talking to people around mental health and well-being and maintaining good social life and all of those things that are important to being a healthy, happy person. A lot of that is about serendipity, it's about discoverability, it's about new things, it's about coming across things that you would never have expected. And so, hence the sort of example image here of your Spotify algorithm that tells you what you might like. How much there are we almost promoting AI as a tool for inefficiency or not just about being productive and efficient? And can it start to promote these other aspects, particularly when we're talking about human at a human level, around some of those mental health kind of serendipitous things that we want to try and see and feel. And then there's this slight challenge area around kind of augmented intelligence, and again, I'm sure there's been lots of talk on this, and it's certainly not, the technology side of this isn't my area of expertise. But what we start to see, and again, we've had discussions about driverless cars and where driverless cars might meet drivered cars, if you like, or cars that have a driver. This was one example where, again, we're in that sort of phase where if we're not fully intelligent, we're not fully artificially intelligent, then what are we? And is there a little bit of a confusing place there, particularly for that human interaction and that person? We did a project here again whilst at the Royal College of Art with people with dementia, and the daughter of this man who had dementia, she'd bought him an Alexa because that was actually quite a useful tool, and he could talk to this Alexa, and the Alexa could obviously do things, play music, etc. But at the same time, all that really happened was we created another technology user interface. So, for example, this user couldn't understand, he wanted to book something in his diary, and for him that was making an appointment in his diary. Whereas for Alexa, the command was to put something in my calendar, and there was a miscommunication, if you like, between that, and that frustrated the user. So we weren't quite fully intelligent, if you know what I mean, in terms of having that natural language interface and conversation. Now, obviously, we hope the more we go on, we will get there. But while we're in that transition phase, it causes challenges, and I think at best, that transition phase can be confusing and a bit frustrating. At worst, we can discriminate against users and be exclusive against users. So that's, I suppose, some of the negatives. I don't want to focus too much on the negatives, but I suppose within that, where we see is there's some real positives of how can we sort of use our experience and our knowledge of people-centered process to create some of those opportunities. One of those is looking at those softer goals. So we talked a little bit about the kind of that drive for productivity and efficiency that AI can do and is great at doing. But also, what happens if we delve into it a little bit more in terms of some of those softer goals and some of those that softer piece that we've spoken about. Again, this was that piece of work that we did on chatbots and voice assistants, and we went out and again did quite a small piece of user research, really, but with a group of you know, a major global company, and we started to look at, well, what the future of their assistant could be, you know, their workplace assistant or voice assistant could be. And rather than it be this kind of, you know, typical young secretarial sort of avatar, if you like, actually what people started to say was, well, we want someone wise and interesting and funny and someone that we can chat to within the work environment. And so, you know, they started to come up with the likes of Judi Dench and David Attenborough as the sorts of assistants and personalities that they wanted to interact with. And I suppose that really got us thinking about these kind of new relationships that we're forming, and it really is that kind of new relationship with technologies and with kind of artificial intelligent technologies. That, you know, what is that relationship that we want to have? What are the personality traits that we want to give our technology, if you like, or we want our technology to adopt and adapt to? And, you know, is that you know, something almost subservient, or almost, do we want our technology to be our pet? Do we want our technology to be a bit more authoritative and be our boss? You know, is it our friend? Is it our mother? You know, what are the traits that we want to bring out from that from technology when we start interacting with it, and when it starts to develop? We think this is another piece, and again, there's probably a lot of work already that's been done here, but I think obviously continuing in terms of how do we combine some of that softer stuff and the qualitative stuff and some of that design thinking stuff with some of that big data stuff. And I think sometimes, particularly when we talk about the world's greatest challenges and the world's greatest social challenges, things like healthcare and education and you know, and the environment and all of these you know, these major things, we sometimes think really big because they are really big issues, and we think about the billions of people that you know, that are affected by them, and sometimes we lose touch that actually, you know, we talk quite a lot in the work that we do about the power of one. So, you know, if you go out in a qualitative interview and you hear one interesting thing from one person, that might be enough to actually get started and start to solve that challenge. So I guess all we're saying here really is that there's a marry up between the big data and the kind of thick data of actually you know, talking to people and making sure they marry up, and that we're not just saying, right, we've got to solve education through AI, and you know, there's other ways and means of how we understand what the challenge is within that and the opportunity areas within that. I think the other one that I'm really interested by and haven't got an answer for, but is how do we accept and understand the broader societal impact of some of the work that we do, and particularly some of the technologies that we implement. This is this is Hans Rosling, who does a great TED talk, but he talks about the greatest invention of the last century being the washing machine, because it effectively freed women from doing daily chores of laundry. That in turn led to a greater level of education, and that in turn led to mothers who were typically the people who raised the kids, actually being able to teach their children how to read, how to write, how to explore, how to create, etc. And so, you know, this level of global education, if you like, massively increased because of the invention of the washing machine. And I think there's an important thing to think about here about how our whatever we implement will have these, you know, networked and broader effects that sometimes we can't comprehend, but perhaps it's useful to at least understand in what we're doing might affect something completely over here in a completely different sector and industry and whatever else, and trying to almost explore those relationships is almost as important as the development itself. And then there's a piece, obviously, and it comes back to that piece about how AI is a little bit has a sort of almost a negative press, if you like. But how do we reframe that narrative that this is a tool to help, not replace humans? And I think that is coming. And obviously, like I say, the more applications that we start to see that really help people in their daily lives, I think that narrative is starting to reframe. But there's almost a kind of a media piece, if you like, that needs to be worked out around that, in terms of how that's framed. And then this piece, I think, we mentioned, talked about it earlier, in terms of that push for productivity and inefficiency. But when we start to talk about people and what's good for us, it's not always efficiency and productivity, and sometimes it's inefficiency, and it's serendipity, and it's all of those good things. And so, how do we promote AI to start to look at these other things that that we benefit from? So this is a lovely lighting installation that's cultural led, but it changes color and light and intensity and all of these things. But how does that make us experience joy and happiness and connection? And how do we connect that then back to these really important, almost well-being goals that we strive to achieve? These are the 5 ways to well-being in terms of connection, being active, taking notice, learning, and giving. And how can AI start to do that and start to play on some of those softer goals that ultimately us to lead healthy, happy lives as humans want to go on to. And I suppose that touches really on this, which just says, how do we actually measure some of those things? How do we measure joy? How do we measure pleasure? How do we start to do that so that we can build it into our models that we're making to say, okay, actually, yes, we increased efficiency X amount, but really importantly, we increased human connection by this much, or we increased human happiness, or joy, or pleasure, or experience. And so, how do we start to build that into some of those technology models is quite interesting as well. So those, I suppose, were my broad thoughts around some of the challenges and opportunities. I just wanted to touch on for 5 minutes or so before we can look at questions, on where we've looked at doing that in a city context, if you like. So this is, I'll just pull this up. But this is a project called Our Future Foyle, and it's a project that we're doing in Londonderry in Northern Ireland. And it's really focused on a place, so it's focused on the city of Derry, Londonderry. And the Foyle is the river that runs between runs right through the city. And not to get too deep into the context, but Londonderry, there's a history of trauma. There was a conflict there, the largest and longest running civil conflict in Europe from the late 60s until the late 90s. And there was loss of life, and there was division in the city, and that sort of thing. And sadly, the river within the city has become synonymous with that divide, if you like. And it's become synonymous with a mental health challenge and a well-being challenge. And unlike most city rivers, where there's kind of amenities and promenades and things that you can do, really the city here in Derry almost turned its back on its river because it was seen as this quite divisive piece of city infrastructure. And it became synonymous, like I say, with some of the mental health challenge and a challenge around suicide. And so we were brought in really to look at a creative and innovative approach to dealing with suicide prevention along this piece of city infrastructure and along the river. And really what we started to look at was how could we reframe the challenge around from suicide, which has these very negative connotations, towards positive connotations around well-being and better well-being, and how can we regenerate that riverfront, but with social, economic and health impacts there as well. So one of the things that we did, we went through that design process that I was talking about, that kind of double diamond, if you like. So we went out and we spoke to people about their river. We spoke to the positives and negatives. One of the things that we did was, try to do that quite creatively. So not just about sort of surveys and interviews, but through art and culture. So this was an art installation that we did along the river, and what we realized is when we actually spoke to people, one of the positive things that they spoke about when they talked about the river was a whale that swam up the river in the 1970s, and everyone kind of came to look at this whale because it got a bit lost down the river. So we used that as a prompt to create an art installation that brought back the story of that whale. But really importantly, what it did was we used it as a tool to engage citizens in the story of their riverfront, and how can we better utilise and use that riverfront for positive impact and positive well-being. And we did all sorts of kind of creative engagements. We did, we hosted cinema clubs in the city and all sorts of stuff like that. But importantly, all of that was based around that engagement. So even when you bought your tickets for the cinema, it had questions around positive uses of that riverfront and how can we better use that riverfront. And we went out and did lots of kind of citywide engagement, fairly sort of typical design engagement and qualitative engagement along the city. That led to an academic model, and I won't go into too much detail in that, but it looked at kind of some of the behaviour change elements of how we might want to approach better well-being in terms of kind of physical support, softer supports, and also increasing footfall. How do we raise awareness, identify vulnerable people, and support those vulnerable people when they're in need. And what that led to really was a range of social and cultural interventions, but I'll just talk about two where there was a kind of immediate technology application and where we started to apply technology. One was around the Foyle bubbles, and the Foyle bubbles really came from the insight that there was a lack of kind of things to do and a lack of presence and activity along the riverfront. So what we started to look at doing was introducing these bubbles. There are a series of kind of portable pop-up pods that support local community uses, entrepreneurial uses, and things like that. So, greengrocers and barbers and things like that. But also, more community uses around, gyms and events and things like that. And they're on wheels, and so they can be moved around the riverfront as and when is kind of needed, to really try and bring some festivity and some animation and some activation back to that riverfront, and almost increase the eyes and the ears along the riverfront. So you create a kind of community response rather than just a clinical response to mental health issues in that area. But importantly, I suppose, from the technology side of things, we could start to look at how they respond to city challenges, how they respond. This is, for example, at night time, how they might light up along the river. So they start to light up secluded areas of the water and act as beacons within the city. But also, really importantly, how we might be able to embed smart technologies into those. So this is a short clip.
Play me some music then, Bubble.
Here's your tunes.
Wake up, Bubble.
How can I help?
Where can I find something local to eat?
Try that wee place up on the right.
Sounds great. Thanks, Bubble.
No problem.
So the important thing here again is, and it comes back almost to that voice assistant example that I was giving earlier, but how can we use those as city infrastructure, almost as citywide voice assistants for tourism, for locals? But I think for us, again, equally, what was really important is how do we start to provide almost activation and animation that's there, even when these bubbles and these pods aren't used by entrepreneurs or communities, so at night. So yes, it might be a bit of fun about how do you you know, can you play me some music while I'm walking down the river? And that starts to build that sense of animation along the riverfront. It can be for tourists, you know, where can I find something to do? But really importantly, you know, obviously it starts to act into some of that security within cities. So, you know, can we start to look at how we tackle some city challenges around some of those security elements? But from our side, particularly when we were looking at the well-being, it also starts to look at, can we use this kind of technology, city infrastructure and technology, to look at well-being and look at people along the river, particularly late at night and when it's secluded, from a mental health and well-being perspective. So yes, it's about tourism, and it's about economy, and it's about navigation in the city, but it's also actually about you know, looking out for people who might be vulnerable at the river's edge. We also looked at how we could do that through pop-ups and installations, and again, you know, this kind of builds on some of that, I suppose, but how we might use technology here, but in this sense, kind of responding and being programmed, so responding to people as they pass by. But again, from a mental health and well-being perspective, how do you start to bring life to places within the city where potentially they're secluded or isolated and at night? And how do you build technology applications into infrastructure where you might not always be able to build a physical piece of infrastructure? I was going to leave it there and I suppose open it up to questions. Hopefully that gives a little bit of background as to us, some of that human-centered perspective of where we see design thinking and artificial intelligence, and then how we've applied it to kind of a city scale, I suppose. But I welcome questions.
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Jack, many congratulations. It's amazing the kind of work that you and your team are doing with a hardcore of design thinking and then blending AI around that. Many congratulations.
Thank you.
And it was a very lucid narrative. Professor Yogesh, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm equally fascinated actually to hear the talk, and this talk just demonstrates that you know, when we talk about AI, we just think about technology. We don't think about things around the technology actually. And what Jack had just narrated shows that much more actually required, and especially think from our perspective as a management researcher, as a social scientist. I think there are lots need to be done around the technology, rather than technology is already you know, developed or will be developed. It is on course anyway. It's about how to fit that technology around us. I think that's what you know, Jack very nicely narrated.
Indeed.
And I think the example that you gave, Jack, about washing machine is a fantastic one. But one difference that I see here is in washing machine, there was no uncertainty. In AI, people worried about, I mean, you know, the negative narrative that has been portrayed that the AI will take over, because AI is not a technology that is static. It will learn, it will develop by itself, and tomorrow it will start giving command to human rather than being controlled by human. So how you see this kind of perception about AI being removed or being reduced through public perception?
Well, the perception, if you like, that like you say, AI will build itself and tell us, you know, think, yes, no, I agree. And I think that's what scares a lot of people, and you know, in the public domain, certainly. And I think it goes back to that point of, you know, I don't have the answer, but I think we need to try and work out, how are we building AI? How does it build itself? You know, when it does, and how, you know, cues does it use to build itself? And I think one of the things that I find really interesting is that we might be, I haven't seen it fully yet, but we might be able to build a piece of technology that's completely bias free and has no biases whatsoever. But will we then be able to understand it, because we have so many biases, our whole, and we might not be able to use it or understand it, or, we might not have that interaction with it because our whole life is built on biases and social and cultural norms and all of these things. So that's a really interesting area, and I don't know if there is an answer to it. I haven't seen one yet, but it is quite interesting. And I think just on that piece of, AI telling us what to do, I agree, and I think there's a positive and negative spin on that. There's a negative spin of we're going to lose all our jobs and potentially worse, and we become extinct or whatever else, and AI completely takes over, and that's the dystopian narrative that you could see. I suppose on the positive side of that, and if we get it right, it would be quite nice to have some artificial intelligence tell you, hey Jack, you need more joy in your life right now, you're too stressed, or you need more happiness, and here's how you should do it, and that that could be quite nice equally. So I think there's definitely there's a media piece in there as well about how it's perceived, and again, I don't have the answers to that, but
yeah, very spot on, Jack. I think many societies has corruptions and corrupt people, and they can't deal with honest people, right? And exactly in the same way as you said, that if you create an AI which is unbiased, completely unbiased, would actually most of us able to deal with that, or able to use that kind of AI? It will be very difficult, because we are tuned in certain way. And if AI is tuned in different way, probably we won't able to interface. So yeah, spot on. I stop here because there are other questions in the chat box, which Professor Bhattacharya.
Sure. So Jack, with your permission, I'll pick up some of the questions. So we have a question from Francine, who writes, you mentioned teaching AI unbiased behaviors that would in turn change humans' negative biases. Could you kindly elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I think it touches on what we've just spoken about there, that if you can teach an AI, or if an AI can be developed that has no negative biases, what is that impact on us, and how do you mirror ourselves up against that to say, oh well, hang on a minute, we've been doing it all wrong for so many years, or whatever. So I think there's definitely that piece. Excuse me. But yeah, equally, again, and it's probably a question that AI can answer, how do you teach an AI to be unbiased? That's a difficult one as well. Excuse me.
Absolutely. So it's a kind of a dichotomy or a contrast between modeling human behaviors with its biases and stereotypes included, and trying to go to a very sterile, unbiased AI-based approach, which might actually reduce its usage, because everyone will say, hey, I can't identify with him, and it looks almost inhuman.
I guess it's a very interesting one, yeah? It's a chicken egg problem. In order to make AI unbiased, you have to make human unbiased, who is actually designing that AI.
Indeed.
And the data that is inputted in that AI. So if you can remove the biasness in those aspects, probably AI will be unbiased. And that's how you can teach, basically. But again, the earlier discussion that can actually be free from bias, and that's the challenge. We all have some form of bias, depending upon who we are in terms of our gender, our ethnicity, our cultural background, and many other things, a political orientation. All that brings our perspective and uniqueness, and that has impact in design and development of these technologies, actually. So we'll see actually how future shape these things. But then there is a question Professor Bhattacharya from any.
Yes, yes. So I'll read out her summary because she's written a long question. Her summarized question is, what are your views on the degree of substitutability, my apologies, between human and machine interaction in the utility function of a person?
I suppose, is that in terms of how we almost replacing a person and having the having that interaction? Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's something that that we'll see going forward. Excuse me. We've seen lots of applications of it, and it'd be very useful for, I gave the dementia example for example earlier, and there's some real positives, and we know that it can be used really positively. I think at the moment we're in that situation where we're in that kind of augmented intelligence where actually a lot of what we've created so far is a new form of interface, effectively, or new forms of interface design, which is fine, because I think we will get to completely natural interactions, but until we get there, we'll be in this kind of learning new forms of interface and new forms of interaction with technology, and I think that's quite interesting in itself, because and it kind of feeds into that media perception, because if we if we sell a tool to solve a problem and it doesn't, because there's an interface issue or there's an interaction issue, then you've piled on more negative stigma and more negative pressure around AI and the benefits or the negatives of AI.
I mean, I fully agree, and I think there are places where probably substitutability is desired. So, for example, working in mines, who want to, we have all seen the cases where humans been in trouble when they have been working in mines, things got closed and they couldn't take them out, and lots of other things. Working in, for example, a steel plant, where things are very dangerous. In India, for example, working in sewerage, where human has to actually do cleaning part, and that's not desirable. If machine really can replace those tasks fully, then obviously we all probably want those kind of things. However, at the same time, there might be things where we don't want machine to fully invade and to fully replace human. Be it you go to post office, you want to talk to a person at counter, and that's a kind of social activity. You probably don't want to completely replace that. You probably want to keep some element of humanness over there. I just gave a very generic example, but there are many places where you want human. For example, in hospitals, obviously AI can do wonderful operations, right? Surgeries, the more accurate, more precise, and more effective surgery probably some of the AI applications can do than human. But you don't want to remove the human element completely from the hospitals, because something is empathy and sensitivity. When someone is not feeling good, someone talk to the person and say, oh, you will be fine. That kind of thing is very important for us as a human. So I think the essence is substitutability probably will be really good in some cases, complete 100% one, and probably in some cases we don't want at all, and some cases maybe hybrid that might work. And that's where Jack's design thinking would actually be important, to think what can work where. Yeah, so thank you. Just a minute of comment.
Jack, there's another question with your permission, if I can ask.
Please, yeah.
Okay, so Amani Albana is asking, thank you for the talk, very insightful. In your chatbot project, did you find a difference between the perception of being a chatbot versus assistant?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess we looked at the kind of levels of almost authority that you want, and this particular example was in a work context, so it was a work chatbot, and yeah, there was very much differences in whether people, almost, and it comes back to that point Professor Yogesh was saying, do I want to tell this chatbot what to do and they give me answers, or do I want this assistant, if you like, to tell me what to do and I I do those things, so yeah, and it comes back down to that perception. I think the interesting thing for us on this one was that people did want more of this friendly, wise, almost instructful, kind of the Judi Dench, the David Attenboroughs, rather than this, kind of secretary almost that you kind of palm tasks off to. They almost want to be guided, but in a friendly, kind of humorous way sometimes. And I think that personality piece is really interesting.
Right. Judi Dench, in fact, is the boss of James Bond in the James Bond series.
Yes.
Very,
So
very...
maybe it depends which character you take her from, I
Yes,
suppose.
absolutely, absolutely. Jack, little curious, how has been the response to your Boyle River waterfront project from the general public in terms of the mental health and well-being?
Yeah, I mean, generally really positive, because obviously a large part of that project, and again, it's around reframing that narrative so that it's about positivity. So it's all about positivity on the riverfront. It's all about getting to the riverfront for the right, the right reasons. I suppose the positive nature, and it comes back to that narrative piece, is that it's even the bubbles themselves and the way they're designed. I didn't talk about it, but it's very driven by stories from that place and by the research that was done in that place.
Okay.
And so I think people can see that. And again, it's something interesting when we start to talk about how do we implement, particularly when we start to talk about smart cities and how we implement technology in our cities. The technology itself might be transferable, but how do we use and utilize that technology? It's almost, to use the chatbot example again, what personalities does our cities have? And if we're going to use an artificial intelligence or some sort of assistant within our public infrastructure, does that say something different about Foyle and Derry as it does to Belfast, as it does to Pune or to New York or to London, or whatever? We start to build almost a city personality.
Indeed.
So I think whatever we develop, what's important is the narrative and the stories that are brought through it.
And there's possibly also a psychological angle to water. I mean, if you look at the London Wheel, or you look at the Sydney Opera House built on the waterfront, there are lots of iconic spots very near to water. And being near water or hearing the sound of water, there's possibly a deep psychological aspect from a mental health-being perspective. So hence, I think your great work at the Boyle River waterfront is highly appreciated. And is it ongoing, or is it a project that's kind of done and dusted?
No, it's ongoing. We're into the interesting sort of section now of government departments and procurement and getting it delivered. But that's good fun in itself, and I'm sure there's AI that can help with that as well.
Absolutely. Yes, Professor Yogesh. Yeah, please.
I'm just curious, how, Jack, you planning to evaluate the success of this project? What kind of measurement? It is just footfall, or number of people coming there, or some other sorts of engagement? How you measuring it actually?
Yeah, well, again, and this is something that's really interesting, I think, in terms of that city-wide project. We're looking at people coming to the riverfront for the right reasons, and footfall and engagement and things like that. We're looking at people coming to certain areas of the riverfront, secluded areas versus active areas. But we're trying to embed within that, I suppose, more qualitative measures, you know, around, you know, whether it's surveys or whether it's actually interviews and things like that, and perceptions of the riverfront and having a perception study. But I think as well, you know, that's one of the interesting things is, and you know, we're trying to look at, and I know there's others out there looking at, how do you measure well-being? How do you measure happiness? How do you measure pleasure? How do you measure positive things? And that's difficult, but again, equally, I think that's where technology and AI could really be really interesting, particularly within a city context. Is how do you measure some of those softer impacts? And then importantly, I think, how do you get those measurables, those indicators, if you like, as high up the priority list as other policy indicators or strategic indicators such as economy, footfall, and all of these things. That's going to be the interesting challenge.
I'm so sorry, Jack. I have to run to another meeting. But I'd like to thank you, big thank you for your interesting talk. Obviously, you will continue with Professor Bhattacharya and Professor Raman. But I just wanted to say big thank you from my side to you and to Professor Bhattacharya for facilitating the session. And I look forward to continue to interact with you and to find out these very interesting projects. Yeah, thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Yogesh. Dr. Raman, any last thoughts? We are at the top of the hour, but we have a tremendous design thinking practitioner with us.
Yeah, I was listening to it. Interesting projects that are being taken up, which can create some great value to the society, the kind of projects that are being taken.
Indeed.
So a big congratulations to Jack Spencer for doing something like this, and thank you for giving time. This is an evolving field. People say, I think that came up in your presentation also, where, you know, jobs will be replaced and you'll have AI taking up jobs. But of course, I mean, for sure, the comfort that you get when you go and talk to a doctor is different when it comes to talking to a robot. So that aspect will not get replaced, is my view. I don't know, some might say yes, some might say no. But the comfort, especially when you're going through an emotional trauma, you need someone to go and tell you, hey, don't worry, you'll be all right, you know, and that makes a difference. So, I mean, there are areas where you can't have a robot replacing human, but it could be experimental through for some areas sometimes, but over a period of time, I think that will be blended solutions that will only work. Great, thank you, Jack. I don't know if you have more time for questions that are there. Otherwise, Professor Sandeep, you can just look at the time and then take a call. How do we go about it?
Yeah, it's top of the hour. So I think we'll probably express our heartfelt thanks to Jack for all the work that he's doing. And I really hope that we can stay connected and engage with you. So at our B School, Jack, we have a whole bunch of very young enthusiastic students, and for them design thinking is a subject in their MBA curriculum. So
yeah, we have a course on innovation and entrepreneurship. It's an MBA program on innovation and entrepreneurship, where people create their startups after completing a program, and there is a full-fledged course for them, as well as for the course for the regular MBA, that is our flagship program that we have. So we have a course on design thinking. We'll be glad to associate if you can find some time for us, for our students. That will be nice as well later.
Yeah, please do reach out. I'd love to, and anyone on the call as well. Happy to collaborate in any way. So.
Will do. Thank you so much for your very lucid narrative and the excellent work that you're doing. Wonderful to see that, and thank you so much for your time. Thanks also to our co-hosts, Dr. Raman, Dr. Dwivedi, all our participants for their active participation, and the excellent IT infrastructure hosted by Mr. Rajesh Bagewadi and his team. And last but not the least, Jack, we have a hardworking student team at SIBM Pune. They're called as iSmart, and they peep into our sessions, and hopefully they have shot some photographs of you. And if you would visit us, we would actually give you a physical frame as you walk off the stage. So we can't do that because we are online, but we'll send you a few electronic thank you frames as a small token of our appreciation.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure is entirely ours. Thank you, and look forward to seeing everyone again next month in our next seminar. Have a good day. Have a good evening.